Hi guys, today we are going to find out what if gunpowder had never been discovered. You're standing on the ramparts of a medieval castle, watching as siege engines lumber across the muddy field below. The thunderous crack you expect never comes. No cannons, no muskets, no explosive breaches in ancient stone walls. Instead, you hear the rhythmic thunk of massive trebuchets and the whistle of crossbow bolts cutting through morning mist. This world feels almost familiar, yet something fundamental is missing from the air: the acrid bite of black powder. You probably won't survive this timeline, where warfare remained a deeply personal affair of steel meeting steel. Every conflict demands getting close enough to see your enemy's eyes, where victory comes through muscle and cunning. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now sit back and let's dive into today's alternate journey together. You realize immediately that without gunpowder, the entire trajectory of human civilization has shifted onto an entirely different track. Castles aren't just tourist attractions. They're living, breathing centers of power that have never been rendered obsolete by artillery. You watch master engineers perfect the ancient art of hurling death across battlefields with nothing but twisted rope and counterweights. These siege masters have become the most feared specialists of warfare. Their knowledge passed down through generations like sacred texts. You see trebuchets that dwarf anything from our timeline, some standing 4 stories tall with throwing arms longer than ships. The mathematics of trajectory and force have evolved into an almost mystical science without gunpowder's crude shortcuts. You observe siege crews working with the precision of clockmakers, adjusting tensions and angles with millimeter accuracy. Each stone projectile weighs as much as a horse, carefully shaped and balanced for maximum destructive impact against stone walls. You notice how siege warfare has become a patient art form, with campaigns lasting years instead of weeks. Master engineers command salaries rivaling kings, their portable workshops following armies like traveling circuses of destruction. You witness the evolution of specialized ammunition, firepots filled with Greek fire, diseased animal carcasses, and even live prisoners. The psychological warfare is intense. Defenders must watch these massive engines slowly assembled within sight of their walls. You realize that without quick explosive solutions, military engineers have pushed mechanical physics to its absolute theoretical limits. Some siege engines require teams of 50 men just to load and fire once every hour. You enter the forge where master smiths have elevated metallurgy to heights never achieved in our gunpowder timeline. The absence of explosive weapons has transformed sword-making into the ultimate expression of military technology and social power. You witness blades that can slice through mail like silk, forged with techniques that push steel beyond its natural limits. These weapon masters guard their secrets more jealously than any nuclear scientist, passing knowledge only to chosen apprentices. You observe how entire social hierarchies have crystallized around blade quality, with sword grades determining noble rank. The finest weapons require years to complete, with some legendary blades taking decades of continuous work by multiple generations. You see how metallurgical advances have created armor so sophisticated it resembles articulated sculptures more than protective gear. Knights in this timeline move like mechanical marvels, their plate armor engineered with precision rivaling Swiss clockwork. You discover that without gunpowder's democratizing effect, warfare remains the exclusive domain of extensively trained elite warriors. Each knight represents a massive investment: years of training, custom armor, and weapons worth more than entire villages. You witness duels where combatants study each other's equipment as intently as their fighting techniques, reading status and steel quality. The psychological impact is immense. Facing a master swordsman becomes akin to challenging a walking fortress of human engineering. You watch Europe fracture into thousands of micro-kingdoms, each centered around an impregnable hilltop fortress that artillery never conquered. Without cannon fire to breach ancient walls, every defensible position becomes the seat of an independent lord. You travel through landscapes dotted with tiny sovereign states, some ruling territories no larger than a few square miles. Each castle state maintains its own currency, laws, and customs, creating a patchwork quilt of competing authorities. You witness diplomatic complexity that makes the Holy Roman Empire look streamlined by comparison. Trade requires navigating dozens of borders, tariffs, and conflicting legal systems within a single day's journey. You observe how feudalism has evolved into its ultimate expression, with every hill becoming a potential throne. Marriage politics become impossibly intricate as noble families try to unite these scattered fortress kingdoms through bloodlines. You see how technological innovation spreads slower than molasses, as each microstate guards its advantages jealously. Wars between neighboring castle states can rage for generations over disputes about single fields or stream rights. You notice how this fragmentation has preserved incredible cultural diversity, with dialects changing every few miles. The concept of national identity remains foreign when your entire nation fits within walking distance of breakfast. You witness the crossbow evolve into a weapon of terrifying mechanical precision, reaching accuracy levels that make modern snipers envious. Master crossbowmen spend decades perfecting their craft, developing techniques that border on the supernatural in their deadly efficiency. You observe crossbows with lever systems so complex they require engineering degrees to maintain and operate effectively. These weapons fire bolts with such velocity that they punch through the finest plate armor like paper. You see how crossbow guilds have become secretive organizations rivaling any intelligence agency in their operational security. Each master craftsman guards their mechanical innovations with codes, traps, and deliberately misleading documentation to prevent theft. You witness battlefield formations where crossbow units create killing fields so precise they resemble geometric death patterns. The psychological impact is devastating. Armies advance knowing that invisible marksmen can drop them from impossible distances. You discover that crossbow technology has branched into specialized variants: siege crossbows, repeating crossbows, and even multi-bolt systems. Some siege crossbows require teams of men to span and can launch spears the size of telephone poles. You observe how crossbow warfare has created an arms race in shield technology and mobile cover systems. The sound of a crossbow volley has become warfare's most feared audio signature, the mechanical snap of death itself. You step aboard massive war galleys where human muscle power has reached its absolute pinnacle in naval engineering. These ships stretch longer than football fields, powered by banks of oarsmen whose synchronized rowing creates thunderous maritime rhythms. You witness naval battles that resemble ancient gladiatorial contests, with ships ramming and grappling in close-quarters combat. Without cannon fire to sink vessels from distance, every sea battle becomes a desperate boarding action. You observe how naval warfare has evolved into an art of ramming, with reinforced bronze beaks designed to shatter enemy hulls. Ships' crews train constantly in hand-to-hand combat, knowing that victory depends on their ability to fight across decks. You see how maritime engineering has focused entirely on speed and maneuverability, rather than armor and firepower. The finest war galleys can turn on their own length, spinning like water dancers to position their deadly rams. You witness the development of specialized naval weapons: boarding bridges, grappling systems, and deck-mounted ballistas. Maritime battles create spectacular displays of human coordination, with hundreds of oarsmen moving in perfect synchronization. You discover that naval tactics have become incredibly sophisticated, resembling three-dimensional chess played at breakneck speeds. The psychological warfare is intense. The sound of approaching war drums and rowing chants strikes terror into enemy crews. You stand before walls that have grown impossibly thick and tall, as defensive architecture becomes humanity's greatest engineering achievement. These fortifications stretch skyward like concrete mountains, with some castle walls reaching heights that would challenge modern skyscrapers. You witness the evolution of layered defense systems that create maze-like approaches through multiple killing zones. Engineers have developed walls within walls, creating concentric rings of fortification that can withstand siege for decades. You observe how defensive engineering has become more sophisticated than building cathedrals or pyramids in its mathematical precision. Every angle, height, and thickness has been calculated to maximize defensive advantage while minimizing structural weakness. You see how these mega fortifications have become cities unto themselves, housing thousands of defenders and civilians. The walls incorporate living spaces, workshops, granaries, and even underground water systems for extended siege survival. You witness innovations like angled bastions that eliminate blind spots and interlocking fields of crossbow fire. Some fortifications feature walls so thick that entire roads run through their interiors, complete with chambers and storage. You discover that these defensive masterpieces have created new professions: wall architects whose designs rival Renaissance masters. The psychological impact is overwhelming. Attacking such fortifications feels like assaulting mountain ranges rather than human constructions. You ride alongside Mongol successors who have adapted their conquest strategies to overcome fortified Europe without explosive siege weapons. These nomadic empires have developed patience as their ultimate weapon, surrounding fortress cities for years until starvation breaks resistance. You witness mobile siege workshops that travel with the horde, manufacturing custom siege equipment for each unique fortification. Mongol engineers studied defensive architecture like scholars, developing specialized solutions for every type of wall and bastion. You observe how these armies have mastered the art of psychological warfare, using terror and reputation as weapons. They employ vast networks of spies and diplomats to turn defenders against each other before the actual siege begins. You see how nomadic flexibility has evolved into an advantage, allowing rapid repositioning around static defensive positions. These armies carry entire ecosystems with them: herds, portable forges, and mobile cities that can sustain indefinite campaigns. You witness innovations like human catapults that launch infiltrators over walls and siege towers tall enough to overlook battlements. The Mongol successors have developed techniques for draining water supplies and poisoning wells to force surrender. You discover that these campaigns have become generational enterprises, with fathers passing unfinished sieges to their sons. Their greatest innovation is patience itself. They understand that time is their most devastating weapon against fortified enemies. You enter Renaissance workshops where Leonardo-like inventors channel their genius into mechanical war machines instead of firearms. These master engineers create spring-powered contraptions that would make modern roboticists weep with envy at their ingenuity. You witness the development of clockwork soldiers, mechanical automata designed to march in formation and swing swords, workshop tables groan under the weight of gear systems, escapements, and precision mechanisms that power instruments of war. You observe how mathematical principles have been weaponized, with engineers calculating optimal leverage ratios for maximum destruction. These inventors design multi-barreled crossbow systems that fire in sequence, creating sustained volleys without gunpowder. You see mechanical siege engines that operate with clockwork precision, adjusting their aim automatically through gear-driven systems. The fusion of artistry and lethality creates weapons that resemble beautiful sculptures more than tools of death. You witness flying machines designed specifically for warfare, mechanical birds that drop incendiary devices on enemy positions. These engineers have developed steam-powered rams that can breach walls with controlled, repeated impacts. You discover that mechanical warfare has created new tactical possibilities, with clockwork timing allowing coordinated attacks. The workshops buzz with innovation as inventors compete to create the most elegant solutions to military challenges. You enter dojos and training grounds where Eastern martial traditions have evolved into supernatural levels of sword and bow expertise. Japanese swordsmiths have achieved metallurgical perfection that produces blades capable of cutting through stone without dulling. You witness samurai whose training regimens span decades, developing reflexes that border on precognitive awareness. These warriors can slice arrows from the air, deflect crossbow bolts, and perform feats that seem to violate physical laws. You observe how Chinese archery has reached accuracy levels where masters can thread needles from horseback at full gallop. Martial arts schools have developed combat techniques specifically designed to counter the mechanical precision of Western crossbows. You see how Eastern philosophy has merged with martial training to create warriors who treat combat as spiritual meditation. These masters understand their weapons as extensions of their souls, achieving harmony between mind, body, and blade. You witness demonstrations where single swordsmen can defeat entire formations through superior technique and battlefield awareness. The training methods involve mental conditioning that allows warriors to enter trance-like states during combat. You discover that Eastern weapon crafting has incorporated spiritual elements, with some blades requiring ritual purification before use. These martial traditions have preserved ancient knowledge that Western mechanical warfare has forgotten. The human element remains supreme. You witness how Gutenberg's printing revolution spreads knowledge faster than military innovation, creating unprecedented intellectual acceleration without corresponding warfare changes. Books multiply like rabbits, while weapons remain trapped in their ancient forms, creating a strange imbalance between mind and sword. You observe scholars debating philosophy in universities, while soldiers outside still fight with techniques unchanged for centuries. The printing press democratizes learning, but warfare remains the exclusive domain of elite warrior classes with generational training. You see how scientific knowledge explodes across Europe, while military technology crawls forward at glacial pace. Mathematical treatises circulate widely, yet their applications remain limited to siege calculations rather than explosive chemistry. You witness the birth of scientific method in laboratories while battlefields echo with the same metal-on-metal sounds of antiquity. Religious reformations spread through pamphlets and books, but holy wars are still fought with swords and crossbows. You observe how literacy rates soar, while martial skills become increasingly specialized and exclusive to professional warriors. The Renaissance mind flourishes in art and science, But military engineering remains constrained by fundamental physical limitations. You discover that intellectual revolutions can occur without technological ones, creating societies of philosopher warriors. This creates a unique civilization where brilliant minds contemplate the universe while their bodies remain vulnerable to ancient steel. You sail with European explorers whose expansion has been dramatically slowed by their inability to decisively overcome indigenous resistance without gunpowder weapons. Spanish conquistadors face Native American warriors on far more equal terms, with obsidian blades proving remarkably effective against European steel. You witness how colonization becomes a negotiation rather than conquest, as indigenous societies maintain military parity through superior numbers and terrain knowledge. European diseases still ravage native populations, but survivors organize fierce resistance that conventional weapons cannot easily break. You observe how trade relationships develop differently when neither side holds overwhelming military advantage over the other. Indigenous metallurgy rapidly advances as native smiths learn European techniques while retaining their traditional weapon designs. You see how colonial settlements remain small coastal trading posts rather than expanding into vast territorial conquests. European explorers must rely on diplomacy, alliance building, and cultural adaptation rather than military intimidation to establish footholds. You witness the emergence of hybrid warfare tactics as native peoples incorporate European crossbow technology with their traditional strategies. Colonial conflicts become prolonged affairs where European technological advantages are offset by indigenous tactical superiority and environmental knowledge. You discover that without decisive military superiority, European expansion takes centuries longer and follows completely different patterns. This creates a more multipolar colonial world where indigenous empires maintain independence and negotiate as equals with European powers. You witness the Industrial Revolution channeling steam power into warfare before explosives, creating mechanical siege engines of incredible and terrifying power. Massive steam-driven rams pound fortress walls with rhythmic precision that shakes the earth for miles around. You observe how factories mass-produce crossbow bolts and mechanical siege components with unprecedented efficiency and standardization. Steam-powered catapults launch projectiles with forces that dwarf their medieval predecessors, hurling stones the size of carriages. You see how railroad networks enable rapid deployment of enormous siege engines that would have been impossible to transport previously. Industrial metallurgy creates armor so advanced that warriors resemble walking steam-powered fortresses rather than traditional knights. You witness the development of steam-driven multi-crossbow systems that create continuous volleys resembling machine gun fire. Factory assembly lines produce weapons with interchangeable parts, revolutionizing maintenance and repair in the field. You observe how industrial chemistry creates Greek fire variants and incendiary compounds that burn hotter and longer than ancient formulas. Steam-powered siege towers reach unprecedented heights, allowing attackers to literally look down on previously impregnable fortress walls. You discover that mechanical precision has replaced human skill in many aspects of warfare, creating industrial-scale killing efficiency. The marriage of steam power and ancient siege principles produces weapons that would have seemed magical to earlier generations. You explore how the American colonies develop unique tactical innovations using terrain and guerrilla strategies over brute military force. Native American warfare techniques merge with European military knowledge to create entirely new forms of forest and mountain combat. You witness American revolutionaries who must rely on mobility, ambush tactics, and environmental advantages rather than overwhelming firepower. The vast wilderness becomes America's greatest weapon, swallowing conventional European armies in trackless forests and endless plains. You observe how American settlers develop specialized weapons designed for frontier conditions. Lighter crossbows, portable siege equipment, and wilderness-adapted armor. Colonial militias master the art of disappearing into landscapes, striking supply lines, and avoiding decisive battles they cannot win. You see how Native American allies teach European colonists tracking, camouflage, and survival skills that transform warfare strategies. American tactical doctrine emphasizes speed over strength, cunning over courage, and adaptation over adherence to European military traditions. You witness the development of uniquely American fortifications that blend European engineering with Native American earthwork techniques. Colonial conflicts become exercises in endurance rather than destruction, with victory going to whoever can outlast their opponents. You discover that American warfare becomes deeply personal, fought by individuals who know every tree and stream in their territory. This creates a military culture that values innovation over tradition, producing warriors who think like hunters rather than soldiers. You command Napoleonic armies where tactical genius must overcome fortified positions through maneuver rather than artillery bombardment. Napoleon's Grande Armée becomes a masterpiece of logistics and movement, with victory depending on positioning troops faster than enemies can reinforce walls. You witness battles that resemble elaborate chess matches, where commanders must outthink rather than outgun their opponents. Napoleonic warfare evolves into an art form of deception, with feints, false retreats, and psychological manipulation replacing brute firepower. You observe how the emperor's military innovations focus on speed, surprise, and concentrated force at decisive points rather than sustained bombardment. European battlefields become theaters of human drama, where individual heroism and tactical brilliance determine outcomes. You see how Napoleonic campaigns require unprecedented coordination between infantry, cavalry, and mechanical siege engines working in perfect harmony. The continental system becomes even more crucial when economic warfare matters more than military destruction in determining victory. You witness how Napoleon's marshals must master both traditional siegecraft and innovative battlefield maneuvers to achieve strategic objectives. Coalition wars become contests of national will and resource management rather than simple firepower superiority. You discover that without artillery dominance, Napoleonic battles last for days as armies maneuver for positional advantages. This creates a more romantic vision of warfare where personal courage, tactical genius, and strategic vision triumph over technological brutality. You enter the bizarre Victorian steampunk reality where industrial warfare relies on mechanical force multipliers and chemical weapons instead of explosives. Steam-powered war machines lumber across battlefields like mechanical dinosaurs, belching smoke and grinding gears with terrifying efficiency. You witness the development of poison gas warfare decades earlier than in our timeline, as chemists seek alternatives to explosive solutions. Victorian engineers create clockwork automatons that march in perfect formation, immune to fear and fatigue, but vulnerable to mechanical failure. You observe how industrial mass production creates armies equipped with identical steam-powered weapons and brass-fitted armor. Chemical warfare becomes an art form as Victorian scientists develop colorful death clouds that drift across battlefields like deadly rainbows. You see how steam-powered airships replace traditional cavalry, dropping incendiary devices and chemical payloads from impossible heights. Victorian warfare develops an aesthetic obsession with brass fittings, copper pipes, and elaborate mechanical ornamentation on killing machines. You witness battles that sound like giant factory floors, with the clash of metal replaced by the hiss of steam and grinding of gears. Industrial espionage becomes crucial as nations steal each other's mechanical warfare secrets and chemical formulas. You discover that Victorian warfare creates new social classes. The steam engineers who maintain war machines become as important as generals. This era produces weapons that are simultaneously beautiful and terrible, looking more like elaborate sculptures than instruments of death. You experience how World War I becomes a conflict of unprecedented fortification and mechanical siege warfare, rather than artillery-dominated trench combat. The Western Front transforms into a landscape of mega-fortresses connected by underground tunnels that stretch for hundreds of miles. You witness massive steam-powered siege engines that require railroad tracks to transport, dwarfing even the largest medieval catapults. Trench warfare evolves into complex underground cities where soldiers live like moles, emerging only for carefully planned mechanical assaults. You observe how chemical weapons reach their terrifying zenith, with entire valleys filled with poisonous fog that lingers for weeks. The war becomes a contest of engineering endurance, with victory going to whichever side can build faster and dig deeper. You see how aerial warfare develops through steam-powered dirigibles, engaging in slow-motion dogfights high above the fortified landscape. Mechanical warfare creates battles that last for months as steam-powered rams slowly batter through layer after layer of defensive walls. You witness the development of underground warfare, with tunnel systems becoming battlefields where armies fight in complete darkness. The human cost becomes astronomical as soldiers operate massive mechanical weapons that require teams of dozens to function. You discover that without quick explosive solutions, the Great War drags on for decades rather than years. This alternative World War I becomes humanity's ultimate test of industrial capacity versus human endurance in mechanical warfare. You contemplate how this alternate world has fundamentally reshaped democracy, technology, and human nature itself through different military evolution. Political systems develop differently when power remains concentrated in warrior elites who require decades of training and expensive equipment. You observe how democracy struggles to emerge when military service demands such specialized skills that only professional classes can participate effectively. Technological innovation follows completely different paths, with mechanical engineering reaching impossible heights while chemistry remains primitive. You witness societies where physical prowess and tactical intelligence matter more than industrial capacity or resource extraction. Social mobility operates through different channels when martial excellence, not wealth or education, determines ultimate political power. You see how human psychology evolves differently in a world where personal combat skills can still determine individual survival. International relations remain intensely personal when diplomats know that treaties might be decided by single combat between champions. You discover that art, literature, and philosophy develop unique characteristics in cultures where warfare retains its romantic, heroic dimensions. Economic systems prioritize different values when military effectiveness depends on craftsmanship quality rather than mass production efficiency. You observe how this world produces different types of leaders, warrior philosophers who must master both sword and statecraft. The relationship between civilization and violence remains fundamentally different when warfare never becomes mechanized and impersonal. The echoes of steel on steel fade slowly as you step back from this remarkable timeline where human ingenuity took a completely different path. In this world without gunpowder, warfare remained an art form rather than becoming an industrial process of mass destruction. Castles still crown hilltops as living centers of power, their walls unbreached by cannon fire, their lords unhumbled by explosive democracy. Warriors trained for decades to master weapons that would seem primitive to us, yet achieve levels of skill that border on the supernatural. Steam-powered siege engines grind slowly across battlefields where victory comes through patience, engineering brilliance, and tactical genius rather than overwhelming firepower. Perhaps most remarkably, this world produces different types of humans, people for whom physical courage, personal honor, and martial excellence remain vital survival skills. The absence of a single chemical compound has created an entirely different relationship between technology and humanity, between power and politics. In some ways, this timeline seems more romantic, more heroic, more human in its warfare than our own explosive reality. Yet it also shows us paths not taken, reminding us that history's trajectory depends on the smallest discoveries with the most enormous consequences. So here's a question that might keep you thinking long after this video ends. If you could choose between our world of rapid technological change and this world of perfected human excellence, which timeline would you actually want to live in?